Hey, everybody, welcome. I want to start by playing a sound for you. So, this is something that I recorded while on a hike at a trail about 40 minutes up into the mountains from where I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And my wife and I just sat by the river and listened to it for about 5 or 7 minutes. And as we listen to this together now, in just kind of a 30-second loop or so, the thing to notice that's going to kind of get us into our conversation today is that it's a sound of flowing water, but see if you can allow yourself to really notice how many different frequencies and nuances and rhythms there are embedded in the simple sound of flowing water. And we can add an element to this, right? We can add in birds and the sound of rain. If you're in a place where you can close your eyes, I invite you to do that. And maybe take a moment to notice how your body, your heartbeat, your breath responds to these sounds as we layer them in. There's a guy who's really interesting to follow in his work, who's been working with sound in all sorts of ways for probably 40 years. His name's Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. And in his research over the year, he's found that there are sounds from nature that he calls primordial sounds. And in his work, he slows them down. And that there's something in the frequency of these sounds, particularly when we slow them down, that has a measurable impact on the nervous system. I'll bring in just one more layer of sound, and this one will sound quite different. So maybe notice as we bring these sounds in, again, just what you experience. This field note is going to be from the field of sound. And we'll explore it a little bit, both in the sounds of the natural world and the sounds that we are surrounded by, most of us who live in the city and in the modern world. So these are the sounds of whales singing to each other. And we'll bring in just one more sound alongside the whales. This new layer of sound that we've brought in is the recording from a womb. It's what we all experience when we are gestating, living inside the mother's body. And notice the sound inside the womb is not unlike the sound of the rushing water, that there's so much complexity there, and that for 9 months that is our entire universe, and that we experience that sound not just through our ears, but through our bodies, through our developing spinal cord, through our developing cells and nervous systems. I may leave that sound going in the background just for a little bit. And I want to share an experience that I had just this morning. I was taking a walk around our neighborhood, and if you've ever been to Santa Fe, you know that it is essentially a small town. Not a lot of traffic noise, not a lot of congestion. And yet, as I was taking a walk this morning, I recognized, I stopped for a moment and I closed my eyes, and I just invited myself to pay attention, to name and list out, bullet point fashion, all of the sounds that I could hear. The first thing I heard was a garbage truck. And then I heard, a car honking. And then I heard, there was some voices, some people were laughing. And finally, 5 or 6 things down the list, I heard birds. And then there were other human made sounds. So there's this idea, a whole field that's called acoustic ecology. And there's a guy named, I'm going to take off my headphones because I'm not playing any of these sounds anymore. Let me turn these off. Maybe we'll come back to them later because they're really quite lovely. There's a guy named Gordon Hempton who's an acoustic ecologist. And one of the things that he tries to do is he goes out into wild spaces that are, there's only a few of them remaining on the planet where there is no human noise pollution. And you can find out more of it, about his work. He did a think on the Emergence podcast. He has a recording. And also, if you just look him up, Gordon Hempton, you'll find a lot about his work. But he's really dedicated a lot of his work to preserving these complex fields of natural acoustic ecology. And one of the reasons he does that is that we are losing them, which is heartbreaking on a lot of levels. One is that the sounds that exist in these places don't exist anywhere else, right? There are birds whose songs we will never hear again simply because those species have gone extinct. There was some horrifying statistic that I saw a year or two ago when I really started getting into studying sound and its impact on our brains and our nervous systems. So horrifying statistics that we're losing hundreds of songbirds every month. And those are songs, those are frequencies, those are ways of being that will never meet again. They're just gone. And in their place, in the place of these natural ecosystems of sound that all kind of interweave in these beautiful, complex, and nurturing ways, we get air conditioners and airplanes and helicopters and even the hum of electric lines. These sounds that are not in harmony with each other, not working with each other, not even really aware of each other. And the impact that has on our nervous system is quite significant. One way to think of it, right? I was playing womb sounds earlier, but before we were in the womb, before we were human, we were in the ocean, right? We were with the whales, or whatever the evolutionary precursors of whales were. Might have been whales. They're pretty ancient beings. So we co-evolved with these sounds of the deep sea. For the first chunk of our lives, those first 9 months in the mother's womb, it is as if we are back under the sea. We are experiencing the world mediated through fluid. And then we're born. And if we're born in a hospital, immediately assaulted by the sounds of beeping and the hum of electric wires, things that are totally alien to our cells and our nervous systems. But even before that, right, when we evolved out of the ocean, we co-evolved with the forest. We co-evolved with reptiles and birds and monkeys and all of these beings. And so those sounds, the sounds of jungles, the sounds of forests, the sounds of deserts are things that our nervous system at an ancient primordial level responds to and codes, if those sounds are in harmony, as safety. This is going back to a theme from the last episode of what is it about our culture that often our body interprets as unsafe? And one is the sound cues of it, right? The discordant disharmony of an industrialized world, even if we're not recognizing it consciously, often our body interprets it simply as unsafe because it doesn't have any of those signals, birds, water, right? If there's a predator nearby, we hear birds fly away and there's silence in the forest. So our body realizes it's unsafe and it takes the steps necessary to survive. In the last episode, I mentioned this study of a modality that I've been diving into for the past 4-ish years, maybe 5, called inner dance. Inner dance has become a sound-based modality, but it is a way of working with different frequencies of sound to really connect with these elemental energies of creation and of life. And one of the things that we work with isn't just music or synthetic sounds, but natural sounds, working with natural sounds to provide kind of an atmosphere. One of the reasons we do that is that it helps the body surrender and experience a sense of safety so that we can, by layering sounds and rhythms on top of it, start to introduce a little bit more discordance so that from this foundation of safety, we can expand what we're able to hold in terms of complexity, in terms of disharmony, in terms of discordance, so that we can more accurately discern when we're safe and when we're not. Like deeply safe, deeply unsafe in the world or in the universe. Went out on a skinny branch there. I think the thing that kind of wants to be said is that most of us move through an acoustic ecosystem, a whole world of sound that is not nourishing, that gets more and more simplified, that gets more and more kind of desiccated every day. And we see this. There was a really wonderful study about how Western pop music has gotten less and less and less complex, both in the musicality and also in the lyrics over the past 40 or 50 years. So we're seeing this simplification, this flattening of our acoustic ecosystem everywhere from the music we listen to the world we move in. And so if we think of sound as a story, sound as a narrative, then what we see is a gradual stripping away of complexity and nuance in the acoustic story that we move through every day, which can't help but affect the way that we see the world, the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact with the living world around us, or the synthetic world around us. So what might happen if we were to consciously re-expand and introduce more complexity into our acoustic ecosystem? So what might happen? I'll put my headphones on again, and maybe I'll just play a few sounds. We'll bring back in the womb sound. And as we do this, I'll just invite you to notice what you experience, if anything. So again, just notice your breathing. Notice your heart rate. as we rise up from the womb, from the deep waters of the whales, and move into the forests. Maybe notice how your body may respond differently to this acoustic ecosystem as we move from sea to land. And we'll end where we started, right by the river, up in the mountains, just 30 or 40 minutes away from where I'm recording this. Maybe see if you can notice anything new in these sounds of the running water. If we think of it not just as a river, but as a whole ecosystem of sound with its own patterns, its own nuances. And I'll make an invitation that as you go through your day, or maybe even take a few moments after this episode ends, which is going to be in just a few moments, to notice the elements all around you in your acoustic ecosystem. Notice if you work with other people in a shared space, what the acoustic ecosystem is that holds you. Jeffrey Thompson, who I mentioned earlier, did some work both with NASA and Mattel years ago, I think in the 80s or 90s, where he designed soundscapes for them. And it measurably boosted innovation and creativity. Because just as the food we take in nourishes us, depletes us, affects our biological and physiological systems, so do the sounds that we take in. How they interact with our cells and our nervous systems tells a story, impacts our breathing and our heart rate. So that's the invitation, is as you go out into your own field to observe not just the human interactions, not just the weather, but also what are the sounds and how might they be playing a part in shaping your experience of yourself, others, and the greater world. This was fun. I didn't do any editing. All of the sounds were layered in as we talked. So I hope it worked. And thanks as always for listening.